It's just $200, I told myself. By sunrise, I was down $4. 800. My name is Marcus. I'm 28, an insurance adjuster, and I sleep in my childhood bedroom now. 6 months ago, I had my own apartment and a plan to rebuild after cancer nearly broke me. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. IT started with an eviction notice and 4 days to find $1,200. I drove past the casino and saw math, not gambling. I'd beaten cancer. How hard could cards be? The room felt bright and possible. Small bets became bigger ones. Wins felt like proof I was smart. Losses felt like setbacks the next hand would fix. That I wasn't just chasing money. I was chasing the feeling of being in control again. Of being the guy who solves problems instead of the guy who creates them. Hours melted. Credit cards came out. Retirement money followed. By dawn, I owed more than I made in 3 months. The eviction notice that drove me there looked tiny compared to what I'd built. When you're desperate to feel powerful again, how much are you willing to lose to remember who you used? The eviction notice was bright yellow. They always make them bright yellow so you can't pretend you didn't see it. I pulled it off my apartment door and read it twice. 3 days to pay $3,600 or get out. Not just this month's rent, 3 months' worth, plus late fees. The paper felt thin between my fingers, but the words were thick as cement. Inside my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up my bank account. $247.83. The number sat there like a joke that wasn't funny. I refreshed the page. Still $247.83. My medical bills were scattered across the table. Some paid, some in payment plans, some just ignored because there wasn't enough money to make ignoring them feel different from paying them. The cancer was gone, but the bills kept growing like something I couldn't cut out. I picked up my phone and saw a text from my dad. "How are you doing, son? Haven't heard from you in a while." I set the phone down without answering. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the upstairs neighbor's TV. Mrs. Rodriguez had been making dinner smells for the past hour, something with garlic and onions that reminded me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My stomach growled, but the $247.83 had to last until Friday's paycheck. Groceries meant choosing between gas money and eating. I'd been 28 for 6 months now. Before the cancer, 28 had seemed like the age when you'd have things figured out. A real apartment, maybe some savings, definitely not living paycheck to paycheck. While recovering from medical bankruptcy, the old me would have called my parents for help. The new me knew they'd already helped enough. The eviction notice listed a phone number to call with questions. I dialed it and got a voicemail that said the office was closed and to call back during business hours. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Business hours were done, and so was I. Apparently, I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back was thinner than it used to be, with the kind of pale that comes from spending 6 months in hospitals and treatment centers. My hair had grown back, but it was different now. Softer, like a kid's hair. Everything about me felt different, smaller, like the cancer had taken more than just the tumor. The apartment felt too quiet and too small. The walls seemed closer together than they were that morning. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I drove without thinking about where I was going. The streets looked the same as always, but everything felt foreign, like I was seeing my own neighborhood through someone else's eyes. Stop signs, crosswalks, the gas station where I used to buy lottery tickets back when $2 felt like nothing. At the red light on Maple Street. I counted the money in my wallet. 2 20s, a 10, and some ones. $63 in cash, plus whatever was on my debit card. Not enough to solve anything, but enough to pretend for a few hours that money wasn't the enemy. The light turned green, and I kept driving. Riverside Casino sat back from the road, surrounded by a parking lot that was bigger than some shopping centers. The building was low and wide, with no windows you could see through and a neon sign that said Riverside in letters tall enough to read from the highway. I'd driven past it hundreds of times over the years, but I'd never really looked at it. Tonight, I pulled into the parking lot. I sat in my car with the engine running, watching people walk in and out of the entrance. There were all kinds, young couples holding hands, older men in baseball caps, women my mom's age carrying small purses. Nobody looked desperate. Nobody looked like they were gambling their rent money. They just looked like people having a Thursday night. During chemo, I'd read everything I could get my hands on. Medical journals, novels, magazines, anything to keep my brain busy while the drugs worked through my system. One of the books was about card counting, written by some MIT students who'd beaten Vegas in the 1990s. I'd read it twice, not because I planned to count cards, but because the math was clean and logical when nothing else in my life was. Basic strategy in blackjack isn't complicated. You hit on soft 17, double down on 11, split aces and eights. The house edge is less than 1% if you play it right. I'd memorized the charts during my third round of treatment, when the nurses would take an hour between 4 bags and I needed something to think about besides whether the medicine was working. Sitting in the casino parking lot, those charts felt like a secret weapon. This wasn't gambling, this was math. I needed $1,200 to cover rent, plus a little extra for breathing room. If I started with $200 and played smart, conservative blackjack, I could turn it into what I needed. It would take patience and discipline. But I learned both of those during 6 months of cancer treatment that I turned off the engine and checked my wallet again. Still $63 in cash, plus the debit card connected to $247.83. I could take out $200, play basic strategy at a low minimum table, and grind out small wins until I had enough to save my apartment. The plan felt solid. Scientific. Even. I wasn't some desperate gambler throwing money away. I was a cancer survivor who'd learned to calculate risks and make tough decisions. This was just another calculation, another tough decision that I locked my car and walked toward the entrance. The doors opened automatically, and I stepped into a world that was louder and brighter than I'd expected. Slot machines chimed and beeped, in layers, creating a wall of sound that felt almost musical. The carpet was thick and swirled with patterns that seemed designed to hide stains. The air smelled like cigarettes and cleaning products and something sweet I couldn't identify. A security guard nodded at me as I walked past. He was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and the kind of mustache my dad used to wear. I nodded back and tried to look like I belonged there. The casino was bigger inside than it looked from the parking lot. Rows of slot machines stretched in every direction, separated by wide aisles where cocktail waitresses moved between players carrying trays of drinks. Beyond the slots, I could see table games, blackjack, craps, roulette, surrounded by small crowds of players and spectators that I found the cashier's cage and stood in line behind a woman who was exchanging a thick roll of 20s for chips. When my turn came, I slid $200 across the counter and asked for $10 chips. The cashier was young, maybe 25, with bright red lipstick and nails that clicked against the counter when she counted my money. "First time here?" she asked, sliding a stack of green chips toward me. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just thought I'd check it out." She smiled. "Well, good luck. The blackjack tables are over that way if you're looking for them." I thanked her and walked away with 20 chips in my hand. They were heavier than I'd expected, with a satisfying weight that made them feel valuable. Real. Important. The blackjack section had 6 tables, each with different minimum bets posted on small signs. I found a $10 minimum table with 3 empty seats and slid into the middle one. The dealer was a woman, maybe 50 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and hands that moved like she'd been dealing cards for decades. "Welcome," she said without looking up from the cards. "Name's Rita." "Marcus," I said, placing a $10 chip in the betting circle. To my left sat an elderly woman who was playing 2 hands at once, $10 on each. She had a plastic bucket of coins next to her chair and the kind of focused concentration that made me think she'd been there for hours. To my right, the seat was empty. Rita dealt 2 cards to each of us, face up. I got a queen and a 7, 17 total. Rita's up card was a 6. According to basic strategy, I should stand. The dealer would have to hit her 16 or less, and there was a good chance she'd bust. "Stand," I said. The woman to my left hit on both her hands and busted both. Rita flipped her whole card, a 10, giving her 16, and drew a 9. 25. Bust. Rita slid a green chip next to my bet. My first win. I played 5 more hands, winning 3 and losing 2. My stack had grown to $240. The math was working exactly like it was supposed to. Small, steady wins. Patient grinding. No big risks, no emotional decisions. Just basic strategy. And disciplined. That's when the man in the expensive suit sat down next to me, and threw $5,000 worth of chips on the table like he was ordering lunch. The man looked like money. His suit was charcoal gray and fit him perfectly. His watch caught the casino lights, gold and heavy, the kind that costs more than most people's cars. When he sat down, he moved like someone who'd never worried about rent or medical bills, or whether his debit card would work at the grocery store. "Robert Morrison," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Mind if I join you folks?" "Marcus," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and confident. Rita smiled. "Always room at my table, Mr. Morrison. How are we playing tonight?" "Oh, you know me," he said, stacking his chips into neat towers. "I like to keep things interesting." He placed a purple chip in his betting circle. $500. More than I had in my checking account. Bet on a single hand like it was lunch money. I looked down at my own $10 bet and felt small. My careful basic strategy suddenly seemed pathetic. Here I was, grinding out tiny wins while this guy was betting. My monthly grocery budget on every hand. Rita dealt the cards. Robert got a king and a jack. 20, nearly unbeatable. I got a 9 and a 6, 15 total. Rita showed a 7. I should hit the 15. Basic strategy said so. But watching Robert's casual confidence made me second-guess everything. He wasn't following any chart or strategy. He just seemed to know what would happen. "Hit," I said. .7 of hearts. 22. "Bust." Robert stood on his 20. Rita flipped a queen underneath her 7, then drew a 5. 22. She busted too, but it didn't matter. I was already out. "Tough break," Robert said, but he was smiling as Rita pushed chips his way. Sometimes the cards just know. I placed another $10 bet, feeling frustrated. The math was supposed to work. I'd studied the charts, memorized the percentages. But Robert was playing by different rules, rules that seemed to involve confidence instead of calculation. Over the next hour, I watched him win and lose with equal calm. $1,000 here, $1,500 there. He tipped Rita a $100 chip after hitting blackjack, like it was nothing. Meanwhile, I was up to $340, playing my careful $10 hands. "You're doing well," he said during a shuffle break. "Playing it smart, keeping it conservative." I felt patronized. "Just trying to be careful." "Nothing wrong with that," he said. "But sometimes you have to risk something to win something, you know?" My phone buzzed. A text from my landlord. "Marcus, need to talk about the rent situation. Call me when you get this." I stared at the message. 3 days left, and here I was grinding out $10 wins that I didn't call my landlord back. Instead, I looked at my stack of chips, $340, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. My next bet was $25. The cards felt heavier in my hands when there was more money at stake. Rita dealt me an ace and a 9, 20 total. She showed a 6. I should stand, and I did. She flipped a 10 underneath, then drew a 7. 23. Bust. Rita pushed another chip my way. I was up to $365. The win felt different than the $10 victories. It felt significant. Real. Like I was finally playing the game instead of just surviving. My next bet was $50. "Now we're talking," Robert said, nodding approvingly. I got dealt a pair of 8s. Rita showed a 9. Basic strategy said to split the 8s, which meant putting up another $50 bet. $100 total riding on 2 hands. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did it. "Split," I said, pushing another $50 chip forward. Rita dealt me a 10 on the first 8, 18 total. Then a 3 on the second 8, 11 total. I could double down on the 11, which meant another $50 bet. 150 total. "Double," I said before I could think about it. Rita dealt a king. 21. She flipped her whole card. A 7, giving her 16. She had to hit. The next card was a queen. 26. Bust. I'd won both hands. Rita pushed chips across the table, and my stack grew to $565. The rush was immediate and overwhelming. My hands were shaking slightly as I stacked the chips. For the first time since the cancer diagnosis, I felt powerful. In control. Like I could solve problems instead of just enduring them. Robert raised his glass. Some kind of whiskey the cocktail waitress had brought him. "Nicely played, Marcus. Sometimes you've got to trust your instincts." But this wasn't instincts. This was still basic strategy, just with bigger bets. The math hadn't changed, only the stakes. I was still playing it right, just playing it bigger. My next bet was $75. I won that hand too. Then lost the next one. Won two more. Lost one. The money swung back and forth, but the trend was upward. By 11 o'clock, I had $800 in chips stacked in front of me, more than enough for rent. More than enough to buy groceries and put gas in my car and maybe even pay down one of those credit cards. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Without thinking about money. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my landlord. Marcus, really need to hear from you about the rent. Time is running out. I looked at the message, then at my stack of chips. $800. I'd done it. I'd solved the problem. I could walk away right now, cash out, and have enough money to fix everything. Instead, I bet $100 on the next hand. The $100 bet felt like crossing a bridge I couldn't uncross. Not because of the money, I had plenty now, but because of what it meant. I wasn't just trying to solve a problem anymore. I was trying to win. Rita dealt me a king and a queen. 20. Perfect. She showed a 5. I should stand, and I did. She flipped a jack underneath. 15, then drew a 10. 25. Bust.my stack grew to $900. Robert had been watching me play bigger, and he nodded with approval. You're getting the hang of this, he said. Feel that energy? That's what separates the players from the payers. The cocktail waitress brought me a rum and Coke I hadn't ordered. Compliments of the house, she said. You're having a good night. I took a sip and felt the alcohol warm my throat. I wasn't much of a drinker. Beer occasionally, wine with dinner when I could afford dinner that came with wine. But tonight felt different. Special.my phone lit up with another text. This time it was from my dad. Son, your mom is worried. She says you haven't been returning her calls. Everything okay? I stared at the screen. When had my mom called? I checked my call log and saw 3 missed calls over the past 2 days. I'd been so focused on work and bills and the eviction notice that I hadn't even noticed that I should call them back. Tell them I was okay. Tell them I'd figured out the money situation and they didn't need to worry. But first, I wanted to hit $1,200. That would cover rent plus a little cushion. Just a few more hands. I bet $150. The cards came fast now. Win, lose, win, win, lose. The alcohol made everything feel softer around the edges, less sharp and desperate. The casino's sounds, the chiming slots, the conversations, the soft shuffle of cards blended into white noise that felt almost peaceful. By midnight, I had $1,400 in chips. I'd done more than solve the rent problem. I'd beaten it, crushed it. For the first time since the cancer diagnosis, I felt like myself again. Not the sick version, not the broke version, but the real me. The guy who could handle whatever life threw at him. Robert was getting ready to leave. He'd won about $8,000, tipping Rita generously before stacking his remaining chips. Smart to quit while you're ahead, he said to me. Though you look like you're just getting started. He was right. The night felt young despite the late hour. I had more energy than I'd felt in months. The $1,400 was a good start, but it wasn't enough to pay off the credit cards. It wasn't enough to catch up on all the medical bills. It wasn't enough to feel secure again. What if I could turn $1,400 into $3,000? Or $5,000? What if I could solve all my problems in one night instead of grinding through them for the next 2 years? Rita shuffled the cards for a new shoe. The old woman with the coin bucket was still feeding quarters into her slot machine, mechanical and focused. The casino showed no signs of slowing down. I looked at my phone. The text from my dad was still there, unanswered. My landlord's messages were still there, unanswered. But I had $1,400 in chips, and the night was just getting started. I bet $200 on the next hand. The $200 bet felt huge and tiny at the same time. Huge because it was more money than I usually spend on groceries in a month. Tiny because I had 7 times that amount stacked in front of me. Rita dealt me a 7 and a 4. 11 total. She showed a 6. Perfect spot to double down. I'd be betting $400 total, but 11 versus 6 was one of the best situations in blackjack. The math was crystal clear. Double, I said, pushing another $200 forward. Rita dealt me a 10. 21. She flipped her whole card. A jack, giving her 16. She had to hit. The next card was a 9. 25. Bust. I'd won $400. In 30 seconds, my stack grew to $1,800. But something felt different now. The careful, methodical wins from earlier in the evening had been satisfying in a quiet way. These big swings were intoxicating. When I won, My whole body buzzed with electricity. When I lost, it felt personal, like the cards were attacking me. I lost the next 3 hands. $200 each time. My stack dropped to $1. 200 that the losses stung in a way the $10 losses hadn't. It wasn't just money anymore. It was momentum. It was the feeling of control slipping away hand by hand. I ordered another rum and Coke and bet $300 on the next hand. Rita looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not concern exactly, but something close to it. She'd been dealing cards long enough to recognize the signs. "You doing okay tonight, Marcus?" she asked as she shuffled. "I'm fine," I said too. Quickly. "Just having a good time." But I wasn't fine. My hands were shaking slightly as I arranged my chips. The alcohol was making me feel confident and reckless at the same time. The casino's noise was getting louder, more overwhelming. I could feel sweat under my arms despite the air conditioning. I got dealt a queen and a 2. 12 total. Rita showed a 3. I should stand on 12 versus 3. The dealer had a weak showing card and would bust often enough to make standing profitable in the long run. But I was down $600 from my peak, and standing felt passive. Weak. Hit. I said point 10 of clubs. 22. Bust. Another $300 gone. My stack was down to $900. The old woman at the slot machine looked over at me. She'd been there when I sat down hours ago, and she was still feeding quarters into the same machine. Her bucket was nearly empty now. "Honey," she said in a voice like cigarettes and sympathy, "maybe take a little break." I wanted to tell her I was fine, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I bet $400 on the next hand. Nearly half my remaining stack. Rita dealt slowly, like she was giving me time to change my mind. I got a 6 and a 5. 11 total. She showed a 7. Another double-down situation, but it would mean betting my last $400. All in on a single hand. My phone buzzed with another text. I ignored it. "Double," I said, pushing my remaining chips forward. The all-in moment felt like jumping out of an airplane. Everything slowed down as Rita dealt the double-down card. 8 of hearts. 19 total. She flipped her whole card. A king, giving her 17. She had to stand that I'd won. $1,600 in chips sat in front of me again. But instead of relief, I felt empty, hollow, like I'd used up something inside myself that I couldn't get back. I walked to the casino's ATM, my legs unsteady. The machine's screen glowed blue in the dim lighting. I slid my debit card into the slot and requested a cash advance on my credit card. $1,200. The maximum daily limit. The machine made mechanical noises, processing the transaction. The receipt showed my cash advance fee, $36. Plus interest that would start accumulating immediately. I didn't care about the fees. I needed more ammunition. Back at Rita's table, I converted the cash to chips. Combined with my winnings, I had $2,800 to work with. "Welcome back," Rita said, but her smile looked tired. Her shift was probably ending soon. The casino had changed. Around me, the early evening crowd was gone, replaced by serious gamblers and people who looked like they had nowhere else to go. The old woman was still at her slot machine, but her coin bucket was empty now. She was using a credit card at the machine's reader, buying more time. I bet $300 on the first hand back. Lost it. Bet $400 on the next hand. Lost that too. The losses felt different now. Heavier. Each one was money I didn't actually have, borrowed. Against a future I couldn't afford, but the wins felt incredible. When I hit a blackjack and the chips stacked up in front of me, I felt like I could solve every problem in my life. Pay off the medical bills. Move to a better apartment. Maybe even take a vacation, something I hadn't done since before the diagnosis. By 2 a.m., I'd lost track of how much I was up or down. The chips had become abstract, symbols in a game rather than representations of rent money and grocery money and gas money. Rita's replacement arrived. A younger dealer named Kevin who worked faster and talked less. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, dealing cards with the mechanical precision of someone counting down hours until his shift ended. "How's your night going?" Kevin asked as he settled in. "Good," I lied. "Real good." My phone had been buzzing periodically, but I'd stopped checking it. Texts from my parents, probably. Maybe more messages from my landlord. Problems from a world that felt increasingly distant. I bet $500 on Kevin's first hand. Lost it. Bet $600 on the next hand. Won it. The swings were getting bigger, more violent. I was either flying high or crashing hard, with no middle ground. The alcohol made it all feel like a movie I was watching rather than living. At some point, a casino host approached the table. She was professionally attractive, with perfect teeth and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Marcus? I'm Michelle from Guest Services. I wanted to see how your evening was going." "It's going great," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "Wonderful. I wanted to offer you some of our VIP perks. Complimentary dinner, maybe a room if you decide to stay the night. You've been such a valued player." The attention felt good, important, like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt since before the cancer. "Maybe later," I said. "I'm having a good run." But I wasn't having a good run. I was having a disaster that felt like a good run. Michelle left me her card and disappeared into the casino's maze of tables and machines. The VIP treatment should have felt like validation, but instead it made something cold settle in my stomach. They were paying attention to me because I was losing money fast enough to matter. Kevin dealt cards with the rhythm of a metronome. No small talk, no sympathy, just cards and chips and the soft sound of money changing hands. The overhead lights felt brighter now, less warm than they had hours ago. I'd open my emergency credit line sometime after 2 a.m. Another $1,800 borrowed against a future that was looking more and more impossible. The paperwork had been surprisingly easy. They had all my information already, my employment history, my credit score, everything needed to make bad decisions convenient. At by 3 a.m., my betting had lost all connection to strategy or logic. I was betting $400, then $800, then back down to $200 based on nothing more than how the previous hand had made me feel. When I won, it felt like destiny. When I lost, it felt like a temporary setback that the next hand would fix. The old woman had finally left her slot machine. I watched her walk toward the exit, moving slowly like someone much older than she probably was. Her purse hung loose on her shoulder, lighter than when she'd arrived. "You okay, Marcus?" Kevin asked during a shuffle break. "Want to take a breather? Maybe grab some food." Food. I tried to remember the last time I'd eaten. The garlic and onion smells from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment felt like they'd happened in another lifetime. "I'm good," I said. "Just getting started." But that wasn't true. I was ending something, not starting it. I just didn't know what my phone lit up with an incoming call. "Dad." I declined it and turned the phone face down on the table. I bet $800 on the next hand. Kevin dealt me a 6 and a 3. 9 total. He showed a 7. I should double down on 9 versus 7, but it would mean betting another $800. $1,600 total riding on one hand. My mouth was dry despite the rum and coke. My heart was beating too fast. The casino's air conditioning couldn't keep up with the sweat on my forehead. "Double," I said. Kevin dealt me a 2. 11 total. Terrible. He flipped his whole card. A jack, giving him 17. He had to stand that I'd lost $1,600 in 30 seconds. A security guard appeared at my shoulder. Not the friendly one from earlier. This one was younger, with the build of someone who lifted weights and the expression of someone who'd seen too much. "How are we doing tonight, sir?" he asked. His voice was polite but firm. "Fine," I said, though my hands were shaking as I stacked my remaining chips. "Just fine. Maybe take a little walk? Stretch your legs? The buffet's still open if you're hungry." I looked at him, then at Kevin, then at the nearly empty casino around us. The overnight crowd was down to hardcore players and people who had nowhere else to go. I was apparently one of them now. "I'm okay," I said. "Really?" The security guard nodded but didn't move away. He stood there while I placed my next bet, $600, most of what I had left. Kevin dealt me a queen and a 4. 14 total. He showed a 10. I should hit 14 versus 10. Basic strategy burned into my memory from those long chemo sessions. But basic strategy felt like a joke now. Nothing about this night had followed any kind of strategy. "Hit," I said. .8 of spades. 22. Bust. The security guard watched me lose, his expression unchanged. "Sir, I really think you should take a break." But I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at the casino's financial services kiosk. Near the wall, its screen advertising quick loans against 401k accounts. I still had my retirement fund. What was left of it after the medical bankruptcy? Anyway, I walked over to the kiosk and inserted my driver's license. The screen asked for my social security number, my employer's information, my account details. I provided everything it wanted. The loan was for $1,600. The interest rate was 18% annually, plus processing fees. The money would be deducted from my retirement account and added to my existing debt that I barely read the terms before. Signing electronically, with fresh chips in hand, I returned to Kevin's table. The security guard was gone, but I could feel eyes on me from somewhere in the casino's maze of cameras and mirrors. My first bet with the 401k money was $800. All of it riding on a single hand. Kevin dealt me a 10 and an ace. Blackjack, the best possible hand that he flipped his cards. 19 totaled. I'd won $1,200 in 30 seconds. For a moment, the old feeling returned. The sense that I could control this, that I was smarter than the house, that mathematics and logic could solve any problem. I bet the entire $1,200 on the next hand. Kevin dealt me a 7 and a 5. 12 total. He showed a king that I should hit 12 versus king. The math was clear, even through the alcohol and exhaustion and desperation. But my finger hovered over the chips, paralyzed by the size of the bet. Sir, Kevin prompted. Around us, the casino was winding down toward dawn. The cleaning crews would arrive soon, mopping floors and emptying ashtrays while the last gamblers stumbled toward the exit or doubled down on their desperation. Hit. I whispered. .10 of hearts. 22. Bust. Everything was gone. I stared at the empty betting circle where my chips used to be. Kevin was already shuffling for the next hand, but there wouldn't be a next hand for me. I had maybe $50 left, not even enough for a single minimum bet at this table. The security guard reappeared at my elbow. Sir, why don't we get you some coffee? Maybe some breakfast? I nodded without speaking. My throat felt like sandpaper. When I stood up from the table, my legs were unsteady. Kevin looked up from his shuffle. Take care of yourself, Marcus, he said quietly. There was something in his voice, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He'd seen this before. The security guard guided me toward the casino's 24-hour cafe, past rows of slot machines that were still chiming and flashing despite the early hour. The players at the machines looked tired, mechanical, feeding coins and pulling levers with the rhythm of factory workers. What's your name, son? The guard asked as we walked. Marcus. I'm Bill. Been working security here for 8 years. Seen a lot of nights like this one. We sat in a booth near the cafe's window. Through the tinted glass, I could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the parking lot. My car was out there somewhere, though I couldn't remember where I'd parked it. Bill ordered coffee for both of us and didn't mention payment. The waitress brought 2 heavy ceramic mugs and a bowl of sugar packets. The coffee was strong and bitter and exactly what I needed. You got people you can call? Bill asked. Family? Friends? I pulled out my phone and saw the missed calls. 7. From my parents. 3 from my landlord. 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, probably bill collectors. Yeah, I said. I got people. But I couldn't imagine calling any of them. What would I say? That I'd lost $4,800 in one night? That I'd borrowed against my retirement fund to gamble? That the eviction notice that had driven me here now looked like a minor inconvenience compared to the hole I'd dug? How much? Bill asked gently. $4,800. Saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been at the table. Plus fees and interest. Maybe 5.2, 5.3 total. Bill nodded like he'd heard worse. Credit cards? Lines of credit. All of it. Credit card advance. Emergency line for 1K loan. Everything I could get my hands on. The coffee was starting to clear the fog in my head, which made everything worse. In the haze of alcohol and adrenaline, the losses had felt abstract. Now they felt concrete. Permanent. You work? Bill asked. Insurance adjuster. $43,000 a year, before taxes. He whistled softly. So you just lost about 3 months' salary. Yeah. The sun was fully up now, painting the parking lot golden. Normal people were starting their normal Friday mornings, driving to work, dropping kids at school, buying coffee and newspapers. I was sitting in a casino cafe calculating how many years it would take to pay off one night's worth of bad decisions. That my phone buzzed with another call from my dad. I let it go to voicemail. The drive home took forever. Every red light felt personal. Every stop sign felt like the universe was giving me more time to think about what I'd done. My apartment building looked smaller in the morning light. The eviction notice was still taped to my door, bright yellow, and impossible to ignore. I pulled it down and crumpled it up. It didn't matter anymore. I was already evicted in every way that counted. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table and did the math on my phone's calculator. Credit card cash advance, $1,200 plus $36 fee, plus interest that would compound daily. Emergency credit line, $1,800. At 19.9% annual percentage rate. 401k loan, $1,600 that would be deducted from my retirement account, plus processing fees. Original cash, $200 that might as well have been burned. Total damage, $4,836 in principal, plus interest and fees that would grow like cancer cells. An MY monthly take-home pay was about $2,800. Rent had been $1,200. Food, gas, utilities, minimum. Payments on existing debt, maybe another $1,000 on a good month. That left $600 for everything else, including the massive new debt I'd just created. I pulled up payment calculators online. If I could manage $400 a month toward the gambling debt, it would take 14 months to pay off. 14 months of living on $200 after paying for everything else. 14 months of choosing between gas money and groceries. And that was assuming I could even find $400 a month. My phone rang. Dad again. This time I answered. Marcus? Jesus, son, we've been worried sick. Your mother called you 5 times yesterday. Are you okay? His voice sounded older than I remembered. Tired. Scared. I'm okay, Dad. Just been busy with work stuff. Work stuff at 6 in the morning on a Friday? I looked at the clock. 6:23 a.m. I'd been awake for almost 24 hours. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start. Marcus. His voice was gentle but firm. Your mother's in the hospital. The kitchen table seemed to tilt under me. What? Chest pains last night around 11. We called 911, spent the night in the ER. They're running tests now, but the doctors think it might be stress-related. 11 p.m. Right around the time I'd been betting $500 hands and ignoring their calls. Which hospital? St. Mary's. But Marcus, you don't have to. I'll be right there. I hung up and grabbed my keys. My parents needed me, and I'd been sitting in a casino throwing away money I didn't have. The guilt felt heavier than the debt. The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes. I parked in the visitor garage and took the elevator to the cardiac unit, my hands still smelling like casino cigarettes and other people's desperation. That I found my dad in the waiting room, looking older than his 58 years. His hair was messy and his shirt was wrinkled like he'd slept in it. How is she? I asked. Stable. They think it was an anxiety attack, not a heart attack. But they want to keep her for observation. I sat down next to him and tried to look like a son who hadn't just destroyed his financial future while his mother was having chest pains. Dad, I'm sorry I didn't answer. You're here now, he said. That's what matters. But it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that I'd been gambling away money I couldn't afford to lose while my family needed me. What mattered was that I'd become the kind of person who prioritized cards and chips over the people who loved me. What mattered was figuring out how to live with what I'd done. The sun was fully up by the time I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage. My mother was stable, stress and anxiety, not a heart attack, but she'd be staying another night for observation. My father looked exhausted, older somehow, like the night had aged him years instead of hours. That I couldn't tell them about the gambling debt. Not with Mom in the hospital, not with Dad already worried sick. Instead, I'd sat with them for 2 hours, making small talk about work and weather while the weight of $4,800 in debt pressed down on my chest like a physical thing. On the drive home, I stopped at a 24-hour diner and ordered coffee I couldn't afford. The waitress was maybe 60, with tired eyes and comfortable shoes. She brought me a thick ceramic mug and didn't comment when I sat there for an hour nursing the same cup. I pulled out napkins and started calculating. Rent was due in 2 days, $1, $200 I didn't have. The eviction process would take maybe a month. After that, I'd be homeless with $4,800 in gambling debt. An MY phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor. Marcus, you called in sick but haven't submitted a report for the Peterson claim. Need it by COB today. Work. I'd completely forgotten about work. The Peterson claim. A house fire, family of 4 displaced, waiting for me to determine coverage limits. Real people with real problems, while I'd been playing cards like a fool. I drove home, and spent the morning writing the report, my hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and too much coffee. Every number I typed reminded me of the betting circles, the card totals, the chips sliding away from me to 18 noon. I called my landlord. "Frank, this is Marcus Chun from Unit 4B. Marcus." His voice was cautious. "Got my messages?" "Yeah. About the rent. 3 months behind, son. I've been patient, but I got a mortgage too. What's the plan?" I stared at the eviction notice on my kitchen table. "I need more time. Maybe another month." "Another month for what?" "You gonna have 4 grand. Next month." The question hung in the air. We both knew the answer. "I understand if you have to proceed with the eviction," I said. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am. After what you went through with the cancer and all. But I can't carry you forever." After I hung up, I walked through my apartment like I was seeing it for the first time. The furniture was mostly secondhand, stuff I'd bought after the medical bankruptcy. The walls were bare except for a few photos of better times. It wasn't much, but it had been mine. I started making a list of what I'd need to pack, what I could sell, what I'd have to leave behind. The security deposit was long gone, forfeited to unpaid rent. Any equity I might have built up was wiped out. By evening, I'd submitted my insurance report and started filling out job applications online. I'd need every dollar I could make to pay off the gambling debt. Maybe I could find weekend work, maybe pick up freelance adjusting jobs. The math was brutal, but it was possible. My phone rang. "Dad." "Marcus? Your mother wants to talk to you." "How is she feeling?" "Better. Doctors say she can probably go home tomorrow." "But son, she's worried about you. Says you look tired today. Thin." I caught my reflection in my laptop screen. He was right. The cancer had taken weight I'd never gained back, and the stress of the past few months had taken more. "I'm fine, Dad. Just work stress. Maybe you should take some time off. Come stay with us for a few days. Your mother would like that." Stay with them. The idea had never occurred to me, but suddenly it made perfect sense. I was about to be evicted. Anyway, at least with my parents, I could figure out my next move without worrying about finding a place to sleep. Maybe that's not a bad idea, I said. 3 weeks later, I was loading the last of my belongings into my car outside my former apartment. The eviction had proceeded exactly as Frank had warned. Papers filed, court date scheduled, sheriff's notice posted. I hadn't fought it. There was nothing to fight with. My parents thought I was having trouble adjusting after the cancer treatment. Depression, maybe some PTSD from the medical trauma. They'd welcomed me home with the kind of gentle concern reserved for wounded animals. My childhood bedroom was exactly as I'd left it 10 years ago. Participation trophies on the shelves, college textbooks in boxes, posters of bands I'd forgotten I liked. Sleeping in my old twin bed surrounded by high school memories felt like falling backward through time. But it was free, and free was all I could afford. I'd managed to keep the gambling debt secret. My parents saw me working longer hours, picking up weekend shifts when I could find them. They thought I was being responsible, building up savings after the medical bankruptcy. They didn't know I was paying off credit card minimums and emergency loan payments that ate up 70% of my income. The 401k loan payments were automatic, deducted from my paycheck before I ever saw the money. My retirement account, which had been slowly rebuilding after the medical bankruptcy, was back to almost nothing. At 28, I had maybe $800 in retirement savings and years of debt ahead of me. At work, nobody knew anything was wrong. I processed claims, wrote reports, attended meetings. I was good at my job, maybe better than before. The focus required to calculate coverage limits and determine fault kept my mind off everything else. Numbers were still numbers, even when they belonged to other people's problems instead of my own, but the casino debt followed me everywhere. When I bought gas, I calculated how many hands of blackjack the money represented. When I ate lunch, I thought about the chips I'd lost. The simplest purchases became exercises in guilt and regret that I'd driven past Riverside Casino twice since that night. Once by accident, once on purpose. Both times, I'd felt the pull. Not to gamble again, exactly, but to return to the scene of the crime. To see if it looked the same, felt the same, meant the same thing it had that Thursday night. It looked smaller in daylight. Less magical. The parking lot needed repair, and the neon sign had a few burned-out letters. It was just a building where people went to lose money they couldn't afford to lose. My phone had stopped buzzing with collection calls as frequently. I'd set up payment plans for everything, minimum amounts that would take years to pay off, but kept the accounts current. The credit card company had reduced my limit to zero. The emergency credit line was closed. The 401k loan would be paid automatically until I retired or died, whichever came first. That I attended one Gamblers Anonymous meeting at a community center downtown. 12 people sitting in a circle, sharing stories that sounded like variations of my own. A woman who'd lost her daughter's college fund on slot machines. A man who'd gambled away his small business. Stories of progression, escalation, bottom hitting, recovery. I left during the break and never went back. Not because I didn't need help, but because hearing my story in other people's voices made it too real. Instead, I made my own rules. No casinos, no lottery tickets, no friendly poker games, no sports betting, no online gambling, no scratchers at the gas station. Complete abstinence, because I knew now that I couldn't trust myself with partial measures. The rules worked, but they didn't solve the underlying problem. I was still living in my childhood bedroom, still paying off a debt that served as a daily reminder of the worst decision I'd ever made. 8 months had passed since that night at Riverside Casino. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, looking at the final payment confirmation on my laptop screen. The last of the gambling debt, $47.83, had been automatically deducted from my checking account that morning. $4,800, paid off over 8 months at an average of $600 per month. Every dollar had hurt. Every payment had been a reminder of 30 seconds at a blackjack table when I'd bet everything and lost. That I called in the payment to close the 401k loan early, using money I'd saved by working every weekend shift I could find. The customer service representative was cheerful and efficient. "Congratulations, Mr. Chun. Your account is now paid in full. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said. "That's everything." But it wasn't everything. The debt was gone, but everything else remained. I was still living with my parents, still sleeping in a twin bed surrounded by high school memorabilia, still driving past Riverside Casino twice a week on my way to and from work, the neon sign serving as a monument to my own stupidity. That my parents had never asked direct questions, but they'd noticed the changes. The way I studied every purchase, calculated every expense, the way I worked constantly, picking up extra shifts and freelance assignments. They thought I was being responsible, building character, learning the value of money. They weren't wrong, exactly. I had learned the value of money. I'd learned that $4,800 wasn't just a number. It was 8 months of eating rice and beans for dinner. It was driving a car with bald tires because new ones cost $400. It was saying no to every social invitation that cost more than $5. I'd also learned the real cost of that Thursday night. Not just the money, but the shame. The way I'd ignored my parents' calls while my mother was having chest pains. The way I'd disappeared into a casino instead of facing my problems like an adult. The apartment I'd lost had been replaced by younger, less problematic tenants. Frank had been apologetic when I ran into him at the grocery store, but we both knew he'd done what he had to do. I would have done the same thing. That I'd started looking at apartments again, but the math was still brutal. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, utility deposits. Even for a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, I'd need at least $2,500 up front. I had maybe $800 in savings after paying off the gambling debt. That my mother knocked on my bedroom door. "Marcus, dinner's ready." "Coming, Mom." I closed the laptop and headed downstairs. We ate at the same kitchen table where I'd done homework 20 years ago, where I'd calculated my gambling debt 8 months ago. The conversation was comfortable and familiar. Work, weather, plans for the weekend. After dinner, I helped with the dishes and then went for a walk around the neighborhood. The houses looked exactly the same as they had when I was in high school. Same mailboxes, same driveways, same front porches where I'd sold magazines for the band fundraiser. But I felt different walking those streets. Older, obviously, but also more fragile. Like I'd learned something about myself that I couldn't unlearn. I'd always thought I was smarter than other people's mistakes. The cancer had taught me that bad things could happen to anyone. The casino had taught me that I could make bad things happen to myself. That I walked past my old high school, past the park where I'd played baseball, past the corner store where I'd bought comic books with allowance money. Everything looked smaller than it had in my memory. When I got home, My parents were watching the news in the living room. They made space for me on the couch, the same spot I'd claimed as a teenager. It was comfortable and familiar and absolutely not where I'd imagined I'd be at 28, but it was better than being homeless. Better than not being able to pay the gambling debt. Better than still being at Riverside Casino at sunrise, betting money I didn't have on cards I couldn't. Control point 14 months after that night, I finally signed a lease on a studio apartment across town. It was small and expensive and the neighborhood was questionable, but it was mine. The security deposit had taken most of my savings, but I'd managed to scrape together enough to move out of my parents' house. My mother cried when I loaded my belongings into the car, the same belongings that had fit in the back of my Honda a year earlier when I'd moved back home. She'd gotten used to having me around, cooking dinner for 3 instead of 2, worrying about someone other than my father. "You sure you're ready?" she asked, loading a box of kitchen supplies into my back seat. "There's no rush, you know. You can stay as long as you need." "I'm ready, Mom." But I wasn't sure I was ready. Living at home had been financially necessary and emotionally comfortable. No rent, no utilities, no grocery bills. Just the slow, steady grinding down of gambling debt and the daily reminder that I'd made choices that had consequences. The new apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator worked most of the time. The hallways smelled like cooking oil and industrial disinfectant. My neighbors were mostly young people like me, working jobs that didn't pay enough, living in places they couldn't quite afford, making it work through sheer determination and creative budgeting. I'd furnished the place with secondhand finds and hand-me-downs from my parents. A small table, 2 chairs, a bed that was slightly bigger than the twin I'd been sleeping in. No decorations, no art, nothing that wasn't absolutely necessary. Every purchase was calculated against my monthly budget. Every dollar accounted for. My work routine hadn't changed. Same job, same hours, same careful attention to other people's insurance claims. But coming home to my own place felt different than coming home to my parents' house. Better and worse at the same time. More freedom, more responsibility, more reminders that I was starting over at an age when most people had already figured things out. I developed new habits over the 14 months of debt payment. I calculated everything twice before buying it. I read every contract completely before signing it. I kept detailed records of every expense, every payment, every financial decision. The habits felt obsessive but necessary, like scar tissue that was ugly but protective. The casino debt was paid off, but the credit score damage would take years to repair. The missed rent payments from the eviction, the maxed-out credit cards, the emergency loans, all of it was recorded in some database somewhere. A permanent record of bad decisions made during a few desperate hours that I still drove past Riverside Casino twice a week on my commute. The urge to stop had faded, replaced by something more like archaeological interest. The building where I'd made the worst financial decision of my life, preserved in neon and parking lot asphalt. Sometimes I wondered about the people I'd met that night. Rita the dealer, probably still working the tables, watching other desperate people make the same mistakes I'd made. Kevin, dealing cards with mechanical precision. Robert Morrison, maybe still betting $500 per hand like it was lunch money. The old woman with the slot machine, feeding coins into the same machine night after night, that I wondered if any of them remembered me. Probably not. I'd been just another face in the casino's endless stream of customers, another story that started with confidence and ended with empty pockets. But they'd remember me if they saw me now. The careful way I counted money, the way I read every receipt twice, the way I treated every financial decision like it might be the one that broke me. 2 years after that night, I was sitting in my car outside Riverside Casino. Not because I wanted to gamble, but because I was meeting someone there. Jake was 24, worked in customer service at my insurance company, and had asked me for advice about his gambling problem. He'd heard through the office grapevine that I'd been through some stuff and thought I might understand. Over lunch, he told me his story. Started with sports betting apps on his phone. Small bets, just for fun, just to make the games more interesting. Then bigger bets. Then borrowed money. Then lies to his girlfriend about where the money was going. "I'm down about $3,000, he'd said, stirring his coffee nervously. I know that doesn't sound like much, but it's everything I had saved. $3,000. It sounded like both nothing and everything. I remembered when $200 had felt like both nothing and and everything. You want to stop? I'd asked. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know I should. But every time I tell myself I'm done, I end up making another bet, trying to get back to even, chasing losses. The same trap I'd fallen into, just with different games and different amounts so here I was, sitting in the parking lot where it had all started, waiting to meet someone who wanted to understand what I'd learned. Jake pulled up in a Honda that looked newer than mine, but probably wasn't paid for. He got out slowly, like he was walking to his own execution. You sure about this? He asked when he reached my car. It's just a building, I said. Just a place where people go to lose money they can't afford to lose. We walked toward the entrance. Together, the automatic doors opened with a whoosh of cold air and cigarette smoke. The sounds hit us immediately, slot machines chiming, dealers calling cards, the soft murmur of conversations, and the click of chips. Jake stopped just inside the doorway. Jesus, it's loud. You get used to it. That's part of the problem. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, watching people play. An elderly man at a slot machine, methodically feeding $20 bills into the reader. A young couple at a blackjack table, laughing and holding hands like they were on a date. A woman about my mother's age sitting alone at a video poker machine, her face blank and concentrated. They all look so normal, Jake said. They are normal. That's the other part of the problem. I showed him the cashier's cage where I'd exchanged $200 for chips. The blackjack tables where I'd met Rita and Robert and lost everything I couldn't afford to lose. The ATM where I'd taken cash advances I was still paying interest on. The financial services kiosk where I'd borrowed against my retirement fund. This is where you lost it all, Jake asked, standing next to the table where Kevin had dealt my final hand. Not all at once. It took about 6 hours to lose $4,800. But yeah, this is where it ended. A different dealer was working the table now, someone I didn't recognize. The game looked the same, cards and chips, and people making decisions that would affect them long after they left the building. How do you not want to play? Jake asked. Being here, seeing all this. Don't you want to try again? No, I said. And it was true. I know how this story ends. We left after 30 minutes. In the parking lot, Jake looked back at the building like he was memorizing it. What now? He asked. Now you decide if you want to stop or if you want to. Keep going until you have your own version of this story. He nodded slowly. How did you stop? I made it impossible to gamble. Gave up all access to gambling money. Set up automatic payments for everything. Made it so I couldn't make the same mistake twice. Did it work? I looked at the casino, then at my car, then at Jake's worried face. I'm not gambling, I said, but I'm also still living with the consequences of one night 2 years ago. So you tell me if it worked. I drive past Riverside Casino every morning on my way to work and every evening on my way home. 3 years now since that Thursday night, and the route has become automatic. I could probably drive it with my eyes closed. The casino looks the same from the outside. Low building, big parking lot, neon sign that says Riverside in letters you can read from the highway. But it looks smaller now, less significant. Just a place where people go to turn money into hope and hope into disappointment. I still live in the same studio apartment I moved to after paying off the gambling debt. Still furnished with secondhand furniture and necessity purchases. I could afford something better now, but better is a relative concept when you're rebuilding from nothing. My savings account has $3,200 in it. Not much by normal standards, but more money than I'd had in one place since before the cancer diagnosis. I add to it every month, automatically, the same way I used to make debt payments. The deposits feel different than the debt payments did. Hopeful instead of punitive. I got promoted at work 6 months ago. Senior adjuster now, with a small raise and more responsibility. I handle the complex claims, the ones that require investigation and judgment calls. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm good at assessing other people's risks while having made one of the worst risk assessments in personal finance history. My parents are proud of how I've turned things around. They still don't know about the gambling debt, still think I was just dealing with post-cancer depression and financial stress. They see the steady job, the apartment, the slow rebuilding of a normal life. They see recovery without knowing what I was recovering from. I keep meaning to tell them, but the longer I wait, the harder it becomes. How do you explain that you borrowed against your retirement fund to play blackjack? How do you admit that? You ignored their calls while your mother was having chest pains because you were too busy losing money you couldn't afford to lose. Jake quit gambling 8 months ago after our visit to the casino. He deleted the sports betting apps, closed the accounts, gave his girlfriend control of his finances until he could trust himself again. He still sends me texts sometimes, 2 months clean, or saw a commercial for a casino and didn't feel anything. Recovery is a daily choice, apparently. Not a destination you arrive at, but a direction you keep choosing. I've thought about going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings, but I haven't followed through. Maybe because admitting I'm a problem gambler feels like accepting a label I don't want to carry. Maybe because I'm afraid that hearing other people's stories will make me want to gamble again, the same way being around other people's problems at work makes me careful instead of reckless. Or maybe because I've built my own version of recovery: automatic payments, detailed budgets, no access to gambling venues or apps. A life so structured and controlled that making bad financial decisions becomes functionally impossible. I keep $200 in an envelope taped under my car's dashboard. Not gambling money. I learned that lesson. But as a reminder of what I used to think was a small amount of money, back when I believed I could control outcomes through intelligence and discipline. $200 used to feel like nothing. Now it feels like 4 days of groceries, or half a month of gas money, or the difference between having savings and living paycheck to paycheck. The envelope gets replaced every few months as the bills wear out, but the amount stays the same. $200, the price of admission to the worst financial decision of my life, preserved as a reminder of how expensive confidence can be when it's misplaced. Every morning when I drive past Riverside Casino, I think about that envelope. About the difference between the person who walked into that building 3 years ago and the person who drives past it now. About the cost of learning that you can't solve desperation with mathematics, and that the house always wins in the end. Not because the games are rigged, but because the house understands something about human nature that the players are still learning. The neon sign flickers as I drive past, just like it did 3 years ago. But I don't see opportunity anymore. I just see a place where people go to trade their futures for the temporary feeling of being in control. I keep driving